Can you hear at the back? Callum, can you hear at the back? Put your hand up if you can hear at the back. Callum, very good. Whose horse has had colic? Put your hand up if your horse has had colic. I'm surprised it's not more. Put your hand up if your horse hasn't had colic there. No, horse you've seen. Who's had a horse actually die from colic? That's quite a few people, isn't it? Colic is the commonest cause of mortality in old horses that die of some form of disease. Anyone want to venture a guess what the second commonest cause is? Come on, be brave, someone. Shout out. Second commonest cause of death or mortality in older horses, mature horses?
Strangled.
No, laminitis.
You weren't listening.
Laminitis. Right. So this is a scene that I'm sure those of you who've had colic will recognise. It's something nobody wants to come home to see their horse rolling around on its back with its legs in the air like that. And it's really a disease that's almost unique to horses. I mean, people don't do this, do they? You don't have a meeting of 100 people and somebody suddenly roll over in the aisle and start kicking at their own stomach. And so there must be a reason why horses get colic more than anything else. There's no other animal gets colic. You know, dogs very rarely get their stomachs. Cats never get it, and cows very, very rarely. So why is it that horses get colic? This is what we're going to talk about first. Can I reduce the risk of my horse getting colic? And that is going to be the main theme tonight. Can you do things to reduce the risk of your horse getting colic? Because actually horses that live in the wild very rarely get colic. Okay? So it's something that we do with horses that causes this problem. They're not intrinsically designed to get colic. And the first thing I want you to look at is, what is this here? Can you write on the line? Anybody want to? It's actually got a line, so it's the stomach. Right. The stomach of a horse is very, very small compared to the size of the horse. Okay. The stomach of a horse is about the same size as the stomach of a Great Dane. I know Great Danes can be very big, but they're very rarely as big as a thoroughbred. The other thing I want you to look at here, which is unique to the horse, is the size of its large colon. Okay? This is very, very big indeed. So we've got a very small stomach and a very big colon. And the small stomach tells us that horses eat what size of meals? Very small meals. Horses eat little and often in the wild. They're what we call trickle feeders. So here we are. These are wild horses. Well, they're not really wild, they're in Wales, but they are actually grazing in their natural habitat. These are Welsh sort of cob sort of things, right? And look at what they're grazing on, right? Very, very rough grass, yeah? Trickle grazers, right? And the natural diet for a horse is grass, right? So why do we feed them this then? Right? This is what we feed horses, apples. Well, where's a wild horse going to find an apple? And where are they going to get hay from? You know, in the wild. And where are they going to get a nice plastic bucket full of lovely corn to it, right? It's not going to happen, is it? So we give horses 2 large meals a day. There are reasons why we do that. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying it's not natural, right? And when you do things that are not natural, there's often a consequence. So, all diets for horses that are not based, so I'm standing in your way, aren't I? All diets for horses that are not based on trickle grazing, right, are abnormal. Doesn't mean they're wrong. We have to sometimes do things that are abnormal with animals. Riding a horse is abnormal. They're not designed to be ridden. But we have to take that into account in our management of them, and we're doing something that we know is different to normal. And I did a Google search for this talk, and I put horse feeds in, and I found 336 images of horse feed before the 337th image was grass. Right? Okay? So 336 products were listed in horse feed before I got to grass. Okay? In the UK, this is United Kingdom of Great Britain. Here we are. still part of Europe, right? But look at this. What are they on? Look, what are we famous for in this country? Grazing grass. Isn't that lovely grass, right? Is that normal for a horse to be grazing on that sort of grass? No. This is a paddock. It's also somewhere in Britain. And this, you know, we all aim, don't we, to have our fields looking like this. This is what I want my fields to look like. We go around throwing grass seed up all the time, and I'm literally pulling my hair out, what's left of it at the moment, because all of our paddocks are full of mud, right? And it really annoys me. And I'm trying to get them back to looking like this. But the truth is, this is better for horses than that. Because this grass is full of not just fibre, it's full of carbohydrate and sugars, right? Why is it full of carbohydrates and sugars? Because we used to have things called cows in Britain that used to produce milk before we bought it from England, right? And now we have cows, horses grazing on very, very lush grass that really is more designed for cattle and stock. And this, I'm afraid, is what we should be aiming for. I know we're not going to do that because we like this. So we have to just bear this in mind, okay? So, these large colon things I was telling you about, there they are there, right? This is a colic operation, that's Jonathan, and that's Philip, actually, remember Philip. And this horse, when we do a colic operation, we actually have to exteriorise or take out the colons to have a look at them and put them back in the right order. That is the horse's hind foot there, right? That's the incision up here, right? So the hind feet are here, and this is the curl. That's how big it is. It comes all the way out here. So if we take it out through the abdomen, it will come all the way back to here. It's that big, and that is the that's the right ventral colon there, and the right dorsal colon underneath Jonathan's arm. This goes in there, that way round, and then it goes through the left-hand side, but it's in the abdomen, so that's the left ventral colon and the left dorsal colon there. And this is something called the pelvic flexure. And you often, when your horse has got colic, and we do a rectal examination, that's one of the main things we're feeling, because that's where you get impactions. Because all the food in the horse has to come all the way down here, has to turn round this corner, and it gets where it gets stuck, because that's the narrowest part of the colon, okay? But I'm just showing that so you can see how big it is. And the main thing is, it's not fixed down, it moves around freely inside the abdomen. That's how we can take it out. It's only fixed actually just around about there, okay? About there, that's where it's fixed in, at one end. And that means this can move around, and when it gets full of gas, that's what it does, it starts moving about. Now, this is another operation we did quite recently, when we made our incision in the abdomen. This sort of alien, do you remember that film, The Alien, where it comes bursting out? It was a bit like that. We made our incision, this comes bursting out. That is the cecum, right? It's this structure. It's full of gas, okay? It's full of gas because in this horse, the colon is twisted around its base. And what we did was we got all the gas out of there, and we got these colons out, we put them in the right position, put it all back in, and the horse went home happily 4 days later. But can you imagine how painful it is to have something that big swollen up inside you? Okay? Now, unfortunately, despite what we're going to say, there are some colics that we're never ever going to be able to prevent. And for people who have old horses, unfortunately, the pedunculated lipoma, a ball of fat here, do you see that's on a stalk there? Yeah? So it's on a little stalk. I'll just move up to these you know. That's on a little stalk there, okay? And that, it has wrapped itself around a loop of bowel, and this bowel is a horrible blue, black colour. Unfortunately, that bowel is dried because of this wrapped around it. This is very common in old horses in the 20s, and is, I'm afraid, usually fatal. I'm going to show you a more happy example towards the end. So, how do we prevent colic? Now, what we're going to talk about is dietary management, regular exercise and turnout, and the big thing, of course, is control of worms, because that's the other reason we get a lot of colic, teeth and ulcers. I'm not, to any extent, going to cover these two subjects because the whole talk's in their own. Okay? So, here we are. Dietary management. This was last summer at Pool House Equine Clinic. This is one of our paddocks there. Not much grass left on it. We did have some sunshine. Now if we open that gate, the horse can go onto this paddock, right? So if the horse is grazing on this paddock one day, and this paddock the next day, is there any surprise that its colon is kept full of gas from the fermentation of carbohydrates? And that can lead to colic. So when we're making a change from one grazing to another, we have to think of a way of doing that gradually so that the bacteria in the gut can adapt to it. So gradual change, we think the use of grazing muzzles is very, very helpful when you're having to make a change in grazing, or where you have to restrict an animal's grazing for some reason, such as laminitis. But I think something that's much underused in this country is strip grazing. That's where you have an electric wire across the paddock, and you move the wire back about 6 or 8 inches every day. That actually works a treat. I don't know why we don't do it more often, because it also manages your grass very well, and actually keeps your fields going a lot longer. So strip grazing, I think, is very useful. Restricting the time out at pasture is not an effective way of rationing your horse. We know that horses, if we turn them out for 4 hours, and if once they know they're only going to be out for 4 hours, simply eat faster. So the restricting time out at pasture isn't very effective. I think this is actually probably the way to go. Now, the other thing you can do, and something we're contemplating at the moment, is actually putting in some wood chip paddocks. Because if you've got a wood chip paddock, you can totally control what the horse eats, but it does mean you're going to have to trickle feed hay or haylage. Okay? And just remember, when you're feeding hay, you're feeding a diet that has how much water in it? Does anybody know what the percentage of water in hay is? Not a lot, I hear. It's about 16%. And what's the percentage of water in grass? It's about 84%. So hay and grass are almost opposites. Okay, and it's very different to feed a horse on a hay diet to a grass diet. And I always advise people, if they're having to box rest a horse, to soak the hay, so that you're giving horses more fluid artificially with it. However, this system is ideal for laminitics. You can't beat it for laminitics, but you do have to make sure the horse has constant access to fibre. Okay, trickle feeding. Yeah. So the other big one that we're having more and more of here is something called sand colic, and it's a picture of me operating this time. You can see this is the colon again, out on the colon tray. And can you just see how big and distended that colon is, right? And that colon was very largely filled with sand, okay? And it was sand that had caused this problem. And when we had to drain, wash out the colon, and when we washed the buckets out afterwards, you could see the sand in the buckets, okay? Again, we successfully treated it, but sand is a major cause of colic. Well, perhaps not major, but it's something, I don't think we saw this maybe 20 years ago, and I think possibly we simply have more horses, perhaps more intensive grazing, and perhaps we're using sandier soil, but we do have to think about sand. So, in that case there, the weight of the sand caused the whole colon to rotate. So again, the right ventral colon is on the right, the left colon is on the left, but actually they've rotated through 360 degrees, okay? And I can tell that because of the way it's twisted there, and also because this is the cecum, that big gassy thing you saw on the other horse, and that should be over here. It shouldn't be over there, okay? Once the colons were empty, it was easy enough to put back in the right place. And that horse, again, did very, very well. Now, this is Frederica, and she has this wonderful product called Sandout, okay, which is a seed husk, which I can't pronounce, and you give this once a month if the horse is not ill, but if it's ill, you can use daily. And the husks stick to the sand, and the sand can draw the sand out, and it comes out in the feces. So it's a very good product. So if you're on sandy soil, just consider this Sandout. It's a really useful thing. So just remember that this colon, again here, contains billions of microbes. They digest fibre, but if they get too much carbohydrate, they will ferment and produce gas. And it's this production of gas that leads to the spasmodic colic, or in the worst case scenario, causes the colon to displace. And we had a case earlier last year where a group of 4 horses broke out of their paddock into a really lush grassy paddock. All 4 of them got colic. 1 of them got a displaced colon. And that, again, that horse had to have surgery. I think it might even be this one. You can see we've actually got a suction tube into the colon, and we're actually sucking the gas out. The horse went home, and it did very, very well indeed. You've probably seen it on our Facebook page. So that just emphasised the importance of gradual changes in the level of fibre in the diet. Now, other things about feeding, that's the cecum strengthener again. This horse actually, you can see the small intestines here are very distended. That has something called an epipleural entrapment, and that's something you can't do anything to prevent. That the small intestines just went somewhere they shouldn't. There's nothing anyone can do to prevent that. But I just want you to see the cecum there. That's your appendix. Okay, in humans the cecum is the appendix. Okay, see how big it is in the horse. Okay, Jonathan's really big, and if you put that alongside him, still looks quite large. So, time of feeding. Try to be very consistent. Horses are creatures of habit. They like to get fed at the same time every day. Okay. Availability of water. And draw your attention to the winter. We haven't had a really cold winter for 7 years now. But if you remember 4 years ago, when we had that very cold winter, our water troughs were frozen to about 12 inches of ice on the top of the water troughs. And of course, what you forget is that the horse can't get anything to drink. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but when horses actually drink a lot of water in the winter. We notice that now as states, you have to give more water in the winter. That's of course because they're eating a conserved diet, they're not getting any grass. So they're having to drink water to get all their fluids. In the summer, they get most of their water from grass. Okay, so they don't drink as much in the summer, which is paradoxical. Okay, so just remember, freezing water troughs can be a big problem. Okay, and I think horses, all horses, regardless of how muddy the field is, regardless of if it's raining or even snowing, all horses should be turned out, if possible, every day. They all need exercise and movement. Right? So we do have to rest horses for veterinary reasons, usually lameness, or actually if they've had a colic operation. But we are very reluctant to rest horses in our practice. Actually, we try to get them moving at a very early stage, and certainly have hand walking usually in most of our regimes, even for quite serious illnesses. We try to get them mobilised quite early. So every day, try and get your horse out, even if the weather is terrible. Horses don't mind terrible weather, actually. They want to be outside. They don't like being in stables, honest. Now, ulcers, right? Ulcers actually can cause low levels of grumbling colic, okay? Occasionally spasmodic colic. But I'm not really going to deal with these today, but suffice to say, if we remember this trickle feeding business and high fibre diets and loading carbohydrates, then actually you go a long way to dealing with ulcers as well. Okay? Teeth. Now this is Sam's area, so Sam's sitting there, and the Sam's picture, and again I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about teeth, but horses' teeth are there to grind fibre, grass, into the short enough lengths so that the gut can digest it properly. So if you've got a fractured tooth, and it's very painful to grind your feed, and actually you've got food stuck in there, then it becomes much more difficult to present the fibre in the correct form for digestion in the gut. So it's very important just that the horses have their teeth checked once a year, just to make sure you've not got any gross pathology like this, because this, actually I think choke is in greater risk, but colic can certainly be consequential upon poor dentition. Okay? Now, can anybody see what I can see here. Anybody see the problem? What's that? Redworm, right? Does anybody know the scientific name for that small redworm? I think I heard cyathostome there, did I? Yeah, that's a cyathostome. It's a small red worm. And why is it important to control small red worms? This is why it's important. They cause diarrhea, weight loss, and colic. Okay? Now, this picture here, actually, we obtained from a horse that's in our stables at the moment. It's a top show jumper. It's on a good worming regime. Okay? And there is a reason why it's got red worms. It's actually because of the products we use to worm it. But this came in. It has other issues, but our stable staff just happened to notice this in the species. You know, and this is a top show jumping horse that is regularly wormed. So you know, even being an upper class horse doesn't necessarily protect you from having worms. Okay. So I've got some. These are actually Gill's golden rules about worming. I've tried to make them simpler. But the only worms we need to worry about, right? There's only two you need to worry about. One is the small red worm, the cyathostome. The other is the tapeworm. But the one that is the most important is this one, the small red worm, right? You can virtually forget about all of the worms because this is the one that will kill your horse. Okay, it'll do it quite happily. Okay, and there's lots of them around here, lots. Okay. So, as I said, there's red and there's tapeworms, right? And if we control those two worms, here we are, there's another sample from our practice, we will actually usually control all of the other worms as well. Okay? So, the exception of that being the one that causes itchy bottoms, which is a different story, but we're not talking about itchy bottoms tonight. Right. So, the small red worm, right? It's very common, frequently causes disease, and it's resistant to many of the wormers on the market, particularly, unfortunately, to panicure, right? And it's difficult to control. I'm going to show you why it's difficult to control, and it has this. This is the important thing. If you forget everything else, this is what you mustn't forget. It has an insisted larval stage. Okay, now I'm going to show you what that means. Now, here is a really complicated diagram, which I shall attempt to make more complex. We're going to start here, right? Adult worms, right, in the horse, lay eggs, right? Eggs come out of the feces here. The eggs take between they can within 3 days, right? In ideal weather, those eggs can take 3 days to actually molt twice to become an infective L3 living on the grass. So, adult, eggs, 3 days, infectious L3 living on the grass. That L3 is a really cunning creature because it has a special coat on it, which means it's resistant to frost and bad weather. Okay? And in this country, they can survive over winter on the pasture. They might struggle in Canada, but not here. Okay? We're not cold enough, believe it or not. Okay? But it seems cold enough to me. Now, the horse then eats these L3, okay? And it can, in normal conditions, it takes 5 to 6 weeks for that L3 to become an adult and lay eggs. Okay? Adult, eggs, 3 to 4 days, infectious L3, eaten by the horse, 5 to 6 weeks, thousands more eggs. Okay? Right? And so in 12 weeks, you can have 2 full cycles. And it's not thousands of eggs now, it's millions. Okay? But they're even craftier than that, because what they can also do, and they like to do this at various times of year, is that the L3 can take up residence in the wall of the colon, right? And it insists there, and it goes to sleep. Okay, it becomes an insistent, technical term is hypobiotic. L4. And the interesting thing about L4s is it's very difficult to kill them. And why is it difficult to kill them? It's because they're virtually dead already. They just go into a completely hypobiotic state. They're hardly alive, which makes it very difficult for drugs to get in to kill them because they're not feeding. Okay? And then what happens is, either in the autumn or the spring, it can be something that triggers an emergence of these L4s. And suddenly your horse that had no adult worms at all, okay, was quite happy, suddenly has perhaps tens of thousands, perhaps millions of redworm all arrive at the same time inside the Colic, and then you're in a lot of trouble. Okay? And it's this part of the life cycle that makes this worm so deadly and difficult to control, and it's the reason we'll never get rid of it. If you get a lot of L4s, you have a horse that gets thinner and thinner and thinner because the gut gets an inflammatory bowel disease, which you can sometimes pick up by rectal biopsy. If you've got, and the tricky thing about them is that they're not producing any eggs because they're encysted and they're not doing anything. They don't produce eggs. So this is where your fecal egg count can let you down a bit, because the fecal egg count would be 0 if you've got L4s, thousands if you've got L5s. Okay? So we have to take that into account in our strategy to control as well. So here's the encysted ones. See the little red dots? Right, they're encysted larvae in there. Okay? They can't be measured. Okay? You can't tell how many they've got. They're resistant to all wormers except Equine, which is moxidectin. Okay? And I don't want to overly promote one person's product, but Equine is without doubt the best wormer on the market for dealing with this problem. And please note that Equine, which has a similar name, Equine, is not in our experience effective at controlling inhibited larvae. So if you only worm with Equine, you will end up with this. Okay? And they can emerge actually at any time, but they do like to pop out in the late autumn or the spring. Okay? I think more the spring actually. So the next golden rule, and this is the one that you'll all know now hopefully, is that every worming control program must mean every horse receives an Equest wormer on the 5th of November. Now we've just chosen the 5th of November because it's in the late autumn, okay, and because surely everyone can remember the 5th of November, okay, and that will prevent redworm larvae overwintering as L4s inside your horse, okay. At least it's the nearest thing we can do to preventing it. It might not be 100% effective. Now the tapeworms, I'm going to really go over tapes quite quick because actually I don't think they're very prevalent in Staffordshire or Derbyshire. Okay, we've tested a lot of horses. They are becoming a little bit more common. Okay, we do get the odd positive now, but they're not that big a problem in this area. Okay, what they do is they live at the ileocecal junction in the gut, and they cause something called intersusception. The small intestine concertina is inside itself, and that's actually pretty serious. It's rare, however. Okay, so the tapeworm we do need to take account of. But I'm going to say we don't need to be overly anxious about it. So the tapeworm, I'm not going to go through this slide in any great depth, other than to point out the tapeworm, the eggs, right, come out onto the pasture, and they're ingested on forage mites, and the forage mite is what the horse accidentally eats from the grass. So they have this intermediate host, the forage mite, okay? And that tells you can only catch tapeworms when there are forage mites, and there's only forage mites when the weather is warm in the summer, okay? So in the winter there can be no transmission of tapeworms. Do you understand? Yeah? So, these are our next golden rule, is that we've got to have tapeworms on the 5th of November, okay? Because every tapeworm in this country is inside a horse on the 5th of November. Every single one of them is inside a horse on the 5th of November. So if every horse was wormed with either Equest Box or Equine on the 5th of November, this species would become extinct. Okay? Obviously that's not going to happen because we're never ever going to achieve 100% worming. Now you can do a blood test for this as well. I think because it's a low incidence problem in this area, you're better off just worming once a year with the Equest Box. It's easier. Okay? But you can, the blood test is equally valid. I'm not saying you shouldn't do a blood test. I'm just saying actually it's probably just an easier thing to just do with the Equest Box. The Equest Box is Equest plus Equity. Okay? So I don't actually think this problem has much of a role on the term. So, how do you control worms the whole year? And again, I'll simplify this a bit because every yard is different. But we're going to start on the 5th of November by worming every horse with Equest Box. Okay? And then we can do one of two things. We can either do an Equest every 3 months, or we can monitor fetal egg counts. And I'm going to say to you that if you've done this Equest Box on the 5th of November, and therefore killed all those L4s, that the optimal program is actually to do fetal egg counts. Okay? But that will only work if all the horses that have access to pasture are tested, right? And that you have a relatively stable equine population. If it's a dealer's yard and horses are changing every week, then it's no good doing fetal egg counts. But if you have a reasonably settled population, fetal egg counts are the way to go, right? So, if you can't do the fetal egg counts, the worming program, and this again is quite simplified and it can be adapted to individual yards, but the basic structure is 5th of November, Equest Box, 3 months Equest Box, Equest, 3 months Equest, and 3 months Equest, and then of course you're back to Equest Box. As simple as that. Doesn't need to be any more complex if you're using moxidectin or Equest. Okay? You could, these 3 wormers could use a different product. You have to alter the timing a bit, but the 5th of November one needs to be, in my opinion, that product. So, egg counts suitable for yards with low numbers of horse turnovers. Eventually it will be less expensive than regular worming. It's a much more sensible option because we do worm a lot of horses that don't need worming. And the problem is that by the time you've used the product 7 or 8 times, some worms will start developing resistance. We haven't experienced that yet with Equest, but that's why all the other wormers have difficulties. So we're trying to, if you only do 1 worming a year, you've got at least for certain 8 years where it's going to work. So we slow down development of resistance, but as I say, this has to be something where everybody cooperates and does. Okay. Here we go. Just so you can see, that is a redworm egg, okay, a cyatostome egg. That one is a tapeworm egg, and you can see his little head in there. Wait until that's that's the Now we do the fecal egg counts for you. We actually need 1 gram of feces, right? So there's no need to bring these big sacks of feces. We've got enough of our own, right? I have to take the government to bring a big lorry once a week to take it away. So we can do just, perhaps just 1 ball. Alright, some of you bring a big sack in, okay? Right? I've got plenty of my roses, they're growing quite well. Don't need any more. Right? So, but the fecal egg counts really is the way to go. Alright, so now this is a tapeworm. Okay, I just thought it looks sort of nice, isn't it, really? Just really clever. Tapeworm, no feet, it's difficult actually to count those eggs on feet. For various technical reasons, you don't do egg counts usually for tapeworms. There is, again, a blood sample that you can use. Liverpool University do it. And there are circumstances for doing the blood test, but as I've said to you earlier, I think once a year worming against tapeworm is adequate in this area. So, the question I often get is, every time I worm my horse gets colic, so I'm not going to worm it anymore. Right? Now, actually, if your horse gets colic when you worm it, there is a reason for that. It usually means it actually has got worms. Okay? And what you're doing is you're killing the worms off in the gut, and you're stimulating an emergence of L4s. With Equest, that won't matter because the L4s will be killed as well. The other reason I think is because there is still this idea you need to box rest horses on the day you worm them. Now, can I just categorically tell you, you do not need to box rest horses on the day that you worm them. It's positively harmful. Okay? This stems from the fact that in the old days, the things that used to worm horses were purgatives. People gave a horse a purgative and flushed the eggs and the worms and everything out. Okay? And of course it flushed out eggs which were infectious. Okay? Now, modern wormers kill the worms. Okay? So the worms and everything that comes out is dead. Okay? So you don't need to box rest your horse, they can go out. Okay? But there are some horses, we have to accept this, with all drugs, there are some horses, they're pretty rare, that are hypersensitive to particular wormers, in which case then you need specialist advice on how to worm them. Okay? Not worming them is not the solution. Okay? Right, additional management techniques are very important. And so this comes from a very good horse, this. Okay? Collection of droppings. How long does it take for the eggs to become fertile on the pasture?
3 days.
3 days, right? So when a horse does a poo, you've got 3 days to pick it up in, right? Okay? After that, it's too late. The L3 will have emerged, they're on the pasture. So basically, we can be kind and say twice, because that's in ideal conditions, picking up twice a week. Okay? That's the minimum. Okay? Because if the feces are on the pasture longer than 3 days, the L3 will have got onto your pasture. Okay? Rotation of pasture with other species of animals, well, actually, how many of us have a herd of cattle that we can put on our field? So we've got a herd of cattle spare. No? We did try sheep at Crowning Farm. We got 35 of them, and I'm never going to do it again. Don't do the mixed species bit, right? Okay? Harrowing the feces into the, so breaking up the fecal pap. The idea being if you break the feces up, the sun will come and kill the eggs for you. Okay? In this climate, in this country, I would say positively harmful. You're just spreading them around. You're just giving them a helping hand. Okay? So harrowing the feces, I would say no. Okay? Right? And when you bring a new horse onto the yard, before it goes onto the grass, right, it needs to be wormed with an Equest frame box and have a fecal egg count, so you know what you've brought on the yard. Okay? Because you're not managing horses, you're managing pasture. Okay? So these are really important things. Okay? Now, here you are, a good management of bad fat against worms, and here's a very rare picture of Gilton manual worm. I think he leaves that to his wife the rest of the time, but he did work a stable out once at Crowning Farm, but he got halfway through it and we had to ring Emma up to sort it out. It had broken buckets and the wheel came off the wheelbarrow and we couldn't tie the hay net up. So, there you are, it's very rare. Right, so the 4 golden rules, right? The only worms we need to be concerned about is the small red worm and the tapeworm. Every horse gets an Equest worm on the 5th of November, and then every horse should have a tapeworm blood test or an Equest worm on the 5th of November. So I think rules 2 and 3 are the same, right? And good management is invaluable, okay? So there's actually only 3 golden rules. It's even simpler, isn't it? So, there you are. What do you do with your horse? Despite all this, unfortunately, despite all this, you will sometimes get a horse with colic, right? It's not something you can treat yourself. Call us immediately, okay? early diagnosis and treatment can be the difference between life and death in these. Time is of the essence. So just tell the reception what the symptoms are, who's dawn, and actually, can you please just let us know where you are, right? If it's a help, okay? And especially if you've moved since we last came out to you, because the computer still says you are where you were last, okay? And can you give us your mobile phone number, right? And then will you please leave it switched on, right? And make sure you're in the reception area, okay? Because if we get lost trying to find you, it's not really very helpful if we can't get you on your mobile. So these days, everybody has a mobile, everybody, right? So keep it switched on and try and make sure it's got that little thing showing that it's got some reception. Okay, it'll help. Now, if your horse is in uncontrollable pain, do not try to move it. Just leave it. Hopefully, it's in its stable, but try and move things out of its way, like metal things and buckets and hay nets, right? And put more bedding in if you can. Okay, but don't move it. If the pain is less, it's perfectly good to walk it around, okay? Walking a horse with colic, with low-grade colic, is a really good distraction to its pain, and sometimes, hopefully, if we get on some flatulence and everything will be well. And if a horse, once it's got colic, right, I'm afraid whatever's happened has happened. So when it's got colic, if it wants to roll, you're probably best off just to let it, okay, once it's actually started. Just remember, we do have clients injured every year by their horses with colic, they get kicked by them, we get in them with their feet, and every year we have somebody injured. Please remember, your safety is paramount, okay? I know it's going to be stressful to see your horse in this condition, and nobody wants it to be like that, but you getting a broken leg doesn't help the situation at all. In fact, it makes it quite a bit worse. And you're not going to get any help from me for your broken leg, I'm afraid. I'm no good with people, right? So I will just ignore you, right? So you need to go and concentrate on the horse, okay? So the conclusion to all this, right, is make changes to your grazing and exercise programs gradually, but exercise every day. Think all the time about trickle feeding. Is what am I doing as close to nature as I can get it for the use for which this horse has to do? So, if your horse is heavy work, of course it has to be fed, it has to have meals. But why not think about 4 meals, 4 small meals instead of 2 big ones? Right? Can you spread the feeds out more evenly? Make sure your horse isn't at risk from sand, okay? Have a worm control strategy. Have regular dental checks. With some colics, with the best, it's not your fault if a horse gets colic. Everybody feels guilty, but it's not your fault.